Hi there guys, and welcome to another video. Well, it's been a couple of weeks since my last one because I've had a little break. But it's great to be back bringing you another video. So in this video we're going to look at how we can connect to any computer on your network, whether it's a physical machine or a VM, totally securely from any computer in the world with no software installed using only a web browser. Sounds interesting? Then let's get started. Hi there! So, any of you guys out there fancy a bowl of guacamole? No? You're not hungry? Well, how about giving it to the Unraid server then? Because, you know, I've heard that the Unraid server, when given guacamole, is like giving Popeye spinach. When you give the Unraid server a little bit of Apache Guacamole, it gives it some extra powers. Can I hear you saying, these powers you speak about, Spaceinvader, just what are they? What exactly is Apache Guacamole? Well, basically it's a clientless remote access gateway. So what that means is it allows us to have easy remote access to the computers running on our network from any device just using a web browser. Yep, that's all we need. We don't need to install any software like we do with TeamViewer or Splashtop Desktop. It just works. So this can be really useful if we're on a computer where we're not actually allowed to install anything. Maybe we're at work or school and we're having a coffee break and we want to be able to log into one of our computers or VMs on the Unraid server. Well, with a little bit of guacamole we can do that. We can not only control the remote computer, but we can also transfer files to and from it as well. So nowadays, with all how the world's changed recently, a lot of us are working from home. Maybe you run a small business and you've got some staff and you'd like to be able to let them work from home. Well, a guacamole server is going to help you in that way. You can create multiple users that have different permissions. You can control which users are allowed to remote into which computers. And you as the admin, you can see who's logged in when and for how long. And for all those bosses out there who think, yeah, I might know how long my staff are working for, but are they doing any work? Well, for you guys, you can even record their screens. So whilst they're remoted in, you can play back what they've done at any time if you really want to check that kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of things we can do with a guacamole server. And this video isn't going to be long enough for me to show you all of them. So just what are we going to look at in this video then? Well, we're going to look at setting it up as a container on an Unraid server. But of course, any system running Docker, you can actually set it up on that too. And obviously, we're going to want to access our guacamole server remotely and very securely. So we're going to run it through a reverse proxy and then enable two-factor authentication, allowing secure access. This video will look at remoting to various different OS types. We're going to be remoting to Windows machines, Linux machines, and Mac OS. And these computers, some of them will be physical machines, and others will be VMs running on an Unraid server. And we'll be looking at a useful feature that Guacamole gives us, which is to be able to turn on a computer that's switched off by using a wake on LAN ping. And as well as being able to do this to physical machines, we're going to do this to VMs running on the Unraid server as well. So actually from Apache Guacamole, we can start up a VM and remote straight into it. We're going to look at a couple of ways how we can set up file transfers when we're remoting into machines. We'll even see how we can remote into the Unraid server running this and be able to access the files from away. We'll look up setting up multiple users and assigning them to be able to connect to various different computers. And for all the horrible bosses out there who want to spy on their staff, we'll have a quick look at how we can record the screen as well. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So yeah, I know that's a big bowl of guacamole and a lot to get through. So this video, it's pretty long. So to make it easier, I've tried to split it up into bite-sized pieces, and you can see which section we're on by looking at the top bar at the top, which will have the name of each section and what it's about. So hopefully that will make it easier navigating through the various parts of the video. Anyway, as it's such a big bowl we've got to get through, let's get started and tuck in. Okay, so here I am on an Unraid server that's running in one of my client's offices. Now before starting, I'm going to go across and create a new share. And this share, I'm going to call it Guacamole. And so I get faster write speeds, I'm going to cache enable this share. Okay, good. So now I'm going to access this share on my computer using Finder on the Mac, but on Windows just use the Windows File Explorer. and I'm going to make two folders in here. The first folder, I'm going to call it RDP Shares. And the second folder, I'm going to call it Screen Recording. Okay, so with that done, let's close this. And now head across to the Apps tab and type Apache Guacamole. And you can see there's a few containers here. And the one I'm going to install, now I hope I don't butcher this guy's name, is from Tadeusz's repository here. So I'm going to click onto the install button. Now there's a few things I'm going to change from the default template here. Now the first thing I'm going to change is I don't want this to run on a network bridge. I'm going to set a custom IP for it. Now the reason being, if I don't do this, then I can't actually use the Wake on LAN feature that Apache Guacamole uses. It doesn't seem to work on a bridge connection. So I'm going to put in the IP address here, 192.168.1.167. Just put in whatever IP address you want that's in your subnet. Okay, I'm going to leave the port number as 8080 because it's on its own actual IP. It does recommend to change it to something else, but that's only if we're using a bridged network. Okay, so now I'm going to scroll right down to the bottom. For now, I'm going to leave all of this as it is, and I'm just going to add another path. For the name, I'm going to call this RDP and screen, and the container path, I'm going to just make it /share. That'll be fine. And for the host path, I'm pointing across to the share that I just made a moment ago. And now I'm going to click onto add. Everything else leave the same, and click apply to pull down the container. Okay, so when the container's pulled down, just click onto done. Then let's go to the Docker tab here. We can see that Apache Guacamole is running. So let's click onto it and go to the web UI to log in. And the default username and password is guacadmin. So pop that in and log in, and it will bring you to this screen here. Now at the moment you can see it says recent connections and all connections, and obviously there's nothing there yet because we haven't set anything up. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new user. You can see we're logged in with guacadmin. So I'm going to go to settings here and then navigate over onto the users tab here, and next I'm going to click on to new user. And this page is really straightforward. We just put in a username and password like I'm doing now. Then next we just fill in the profile, full name, email address, organisation and role. Now there's various account restrictions that we could put on here. We'll look at that later, but when setting up your first admin user, just be sure to check all of the permissions boxes so your user has full permissions on Guacamole server. So now we can see the user's been added to the list, so let's log out of this user and log back in with the user ed that I just created. So then once logged in, we need to remove the default guacadmin account. Now we've got our proper admin account set up. So again, we just go back to users, click onto the username here, then just scroll to the bottom of the page and click onto delete. Now you could add additional users now, but I think it's much better to add all of the connections to the remote computers first, and then add the users, giving permissions to which computers they can connect to after you've done that. Okay, so let's add some computers to be able to connect to. So click onto here where it says connections, and now we need to click add new connection. And at the top here we can see protocol. If we click the drop down box here, we can see the various different protocols which we can use to connect to remote machines. And the three types of connections we're going to be looking at in this video is RDP, which we'll use to connect mainly to Windows clients, although we can actually use this to connect to a Linux client as well, if we were to install something like XRDP onto our Linux desktop. SSH, which we can use to connect to a terminal session to mainly Linux computers. We'll be using this to connect to the Unraid server. And VNC, well, we can use that to connect to pretty much any computer where we've got a VNC server running on. So to be able to make a connection and use one of these protocols, obviously it must be running on the computer which we want to connect to. So I'm going to go across to a Windows computer now and make sure that RDP is running correctly on that one, so that can be our first computer to set up. Okay, so here I am on a physical machine that's running Windows 10 Professional. Now RDP is only supported in Windows 10 Professional, it's not officially supported in the home version, although there is a hacky workaround way to install RDP on Windows Home, but I'm not going to be going into that in this video. But I will post a link in the description for some information on how to do that. Anyway, let's enable the remote desktop service on Windows 10 Pro. So let's do a search for remote desktop settings. And so all we need to do here is toggle the remote desktop onto on and then click confirm. And if we click onto user accounts here you'll be able to see the users that are allowed to connect via remote desktop. At the moment the main user here, Tash, already has access, but if you had other users on this computer, you just add them here. Now just quickly, let's go across onto another Windows 10 machine, which has got a slightly older version of Windows 10 where you access the settings to the remote desktop slightly differently. So we want to go across to System and then Remote Settings. Now it's not this Remote Assistance bit at the top here, that isn't the remote desktop, it's this bit underneath here. So we just want to check Allow remote connections to this computer, and oh yeah, this warning here, it says that the computer will go to sleep. So when you're connecting to a remote computer, you want to make sure that the computer never sleeps, otherwise it might have gone to sleep when you come to actually access it. But we'll also be looking at something later on to better send a wake on LAN ping to computers that support that. Okay, so that's the two different ways on Windows 10 to allow remote access to the computer. Let's go back to the other Windows machine, and what we really want to do is to set a static IP for the machine that we're going to remote to. So I'm just going to have a look at the IP address which it's been assigned by DHCP, and I'm going to set the static IP address to be the same. Now you should be able to use the host name, but I find when I do that it doesn't seem to work for me, so I think it's always best to use the static IP address on every computer you want to remote to. Okay, so we've enabled remote desktop and we've set a static IP. So now let's go back to the Guacamole web UI and set up the connection there. So the first thing to do is name the machine, and this computer is called Sales. And I'm going to change the protocol across to RDP. Under concurrency limits we don't have to set anything, but I'm going to set the maximum number of connections to 1 and the maximum number of connections per user to 1. We don't need to fill in load balancing or Guacamole proxy parameters. However, under the parameters section here under network, here we want to put in the static IP of the machine we're remoting to, and for the port number, the default port for RDP is 3389. Next, under authentication, we need to put the username of the user logging into Windows 10 and their password on that machine. If the computer's on a domain, then put in the domain here. This computer isn't on a domain, so I'm going to leave that blank. And for security mode, we're going to use network level authentication. And it's important as well to check Ignore Server Certificate. Okay, so next we want to go down to Display here. And I always think it's good to set the resize method here to Display Update Virtual Channel. And what this will do is resize the display when you resize the browser window, so really useful. But if you wanted to, you could put in the exact width and height for the resolution and the DPI and color depth. I normally leave these just blank. And if we scroll down a bit more, under device redirection, we'll come back here and have a look at this later when we set up file sharing with RDP. But for now, let's just go down here to performance, and here we can enable the wallpaper, theming, and various other things. I just normally enable the clear type font smoothing, and there's nothing else we really need to actually put in here. But again, you can see the screen recording here. This is where we'd put in details to be able to record the screen. I'm not going to do that on this machine. And down at the bottom here, this is where we put the wake on LAN details in order to wake up a machine when it's gone to sleep or it's switched off. Now I'm not going to do that on this machine here. We'll do wake on LAN when setting up Guacamole to start up a VM on an Unraid server. So for now, I'm just going to click on to save. Okay, now here we can see the machine under the connections. This is the only remote set up. But to actually access the remote, I need to go up to my username here and then go to home. And then under all connections, this is all of the remotes that I can connect to with this user. So I just have to click onto Sales to make a connection. And here we can see it logging into that Windows 10 machine with the user Tash. Now the screen's black here because I didn't enable the wallpaper. I didn't think there was any reason to do that. The performance will probably be a bit better without having the wallpaper transmitted. And everything's working fine. I've got full control of the machine. Now if I leave this connection open and go back to the Guacamole web UI, you can see under recent connections there's the Sales computer running. And we even get a little preview window of what's happening on that machine. And if I wanted to log back into that machine, I could just click on the preview window and it will go straight back in. Now I'm going to go ahead and make connections to lots of other machines and then come back and take a look. Okay, so now there's a bunch of Windows machines all with RDP connections, and you can see here the various preview windows of machines that I've recently opened or which are running now. And if I log into one of these machines, this time Windows 2012 server, but then because I'm still logged into the Sales computer, I didn't actually close the connection, we can see the preview window here being shown in the bottom right hand corner. And if I wanted to jump back onto that machine, I'd just click the window. but as it is I can kind of see what's happening anyway from the preview window showing what's going on. And the little window will stay there in the background whilst I'm doing other things, unless I want to get rid of it, whereby I can just click on the cross on the side and close down the window. Now on some Windows systems, when you want to actually log out, if you try to do so in the normal way, you'll find that you actually can't find that part on the screen. So what to do in that case is if you just press Ctrl, Alt and End, it will bring up a screen whereby you can sign out. And then just click back onto the home button to get back into the Guacamole server. Okay, so we set up an RDP connection and I got a bunch of them here. So now let's connect to another machine using a different method. This time let's connect using VNC, and for this I'm going to connect to a Linux VM running popos. We go to settings and then the connection tab and obviously click new connection. But before we do that, let's just prepare the popos machine. Now like I said, this computer's a VM running on the Unraid server, so I'm going to go to the VMs tab and just VNC into it from here. Okay, so when using the VM, we can't use the web VNC that Unraid uses to connect to this. We need to use a proper VNC server running on the OS. Now popos already has all of this built in, so we don't have to actually install a VNC server. But to activate the built-in one, we need to go up to the top right hand corner, click onto it and then go to settings, and then go down to the section where it says sharing, and then in the top right hand corner we need to enable the sharing button here. Next we want to go down and click onto screen sharing and toggle that on, and it's also important that we select this here to allow connections to be able to control the screen. And next we need to set a password, so we need to select this here, require a password, and then put in a password here. I'm just going to use the one that I actually log into the VM with normally. So that's it, that's done. That's the basic VNC server that's built into popos set up. So now we can go back to the Guacamole server, and now we can click new connection, and we can see the protocols already on VNC. So let's just name the connection, obviously popos. So now let's scroll down to where it says parameters. And so here I'm going to pop in the IP address. Now I didn't actually show myself setting up the static IP, but there is a static IP address set up on the popos VM. And the port number, by default that should be 5900. Now under authentication I'm going to put in the username, which is the username I log into, and the password that I set in the VNC server. That's why I set it the same to the username and password that I just use to log into normally. And that's it, that's all I'm going to fill in, so I'm just going to click on to save. Now under my user, go across to home and click onto popos to log in, and here we are in popos through Guacamole, and everything's working fine. Yeah, we've got full control over the machine, the VNC connection's working fine, and now if we go back to the Guacamole homepage, we can see our recent remote connections. Let's log back into Windows 2012. And now in the bottom right we can see the other two open connections, the popos and the sales computer. If I click onto popos, we just go straight in and across onto the sales computer and back again into popos. It's a really nice way of working with multiple open connections, just clicking on which one you want to go to. Anyway, let's go back to the Guacamole home screen. So we've set up RDP connections and a VNC connection. So now let's connect to a computer with SSH. And so for the SSH connection, I'm going to connect to Unraid. So I need to know the IP address of the Unraid server, and this one is 192.168.1.3. So let's go back to the Guacamole server, and as always let's go to settings and connections, then new connection. Okay, so first let's name this. Obviously I'm going to call it Unraid, and for protocol we need to change this to SSH. Now let's scroll down to parameters here, and under network we need to put in the network IP of the Unraid server. So for me that's 192.168.1.3, and SSH uses port 22 by default, so we'll pop that in there. Now under authentication I'm going to put the Unraid's username and password in, so that's root and then my password. Under display here I'm going to change the color scheme to green on black. So that's basically for the terminal window, how it displays the text. Font size, I'm going to put that up to 18 I think. And now let's scroll down to the bottom and click save. So now to test it, let's go to the Guacamole home screen and go to Unraid here. We can see it's slightly different to the other remote connections because of its little icon here, which represents a terminal window. Anyway, let's click it and log in. Okay, right, so here we are in an SSH session on the Unraid server. So let's change directory into the user shares and let's list out what's here. Okay, so now we've got an SSH connection as well over to a remote computer. So now we've got RDP connections, a VNC connection and an SSH connection. Now I did mention earlier in the video that we can actually transfer files between client and host. So let's have a look at that now. So if we wanted to actually connect to the shares on the Unraid server that we can see here, then we're going to have to make a little change in the connection. So here we are back on the Guacamole server. And if we click onto the Unraid connection here and let's edit it, and now we're going to scroll down until we come to SFTP. So we're going to enable this here, and then under this part here where it says file browser root directory, we're going to put in /mnt/user. And so our root directory is going to be straight into the shares of Unraid. So let's scroll down to the bottom and click on to save. Okay, so let's remote into Unraid again. And let's change directory into the Unraid shares and list those out again. So now let's access these same shares using SFTP. So on our keyboard let's press Shift, Control and Alt and this little window will pop out. And you can see here where it says devices, we've got the /mnt/user. So if we click onto that, then here we are browsing the Unraid shares. Let's go into the ISO share here and then into this folder vBIOS. And if I click onto the file, it will download it. But also, if I want to upload a file, I click on Upload Files and select the file and click Open, and that will upload the file straight into the share. So we've got full access to the Unraid shares through the Guacamole SSS remote connection. Okay, so let's quickly double check that file's actually there. On the Unraid server, I'm going to go across to the Shares tab, and then click on the View button for the ISO share, and then go in the vBIOS file here. And there we have the file, that RX6800 ROM. Okay, so now let's actually go and have a look at sharing files with an RDP connection. So let's head back to the Guacamole server. And so let's go and edit the sales computer here. And let's scroll down. And we're looking for device redirection here. And we want to click here where it says Enable Drive. And for drive name, I'm going to call it Guacamole. If we wanted to, we could disable the downloading or uploading of files. I don't want to do that. And now for drive path, this drive path needs to be where we've mapped inside of the container. So let's go back to the Unraid server quickly. And this is the share we created earlier. And inside this share, we've got screen recording and RDP shares. So let's go into here with the file browser. And inside here I'm going to make a folder for the sales computer. So let's make a new folder and call that sales. Okay, so there it is. Now if you remember, in the mappings of the container we map the Guacamole share to /share. So where this is going to be /share /RDP shares and then /sales. So let's go back to the Guacamole server. And for drive path, we're going to put /share /RDP shares /sales. So there we've got our location. So with that done, let's scroll down to the bottom and click on to save. So back on the Guacamole server, let's remote into sales. And again, like before, on the keyboard press Shift Control Alt. And here under devices we can see shared drive. Let's click on that. And if we click on to upload files, and we'll upload this ROM file here again. And so now we can see the file here, but whereabouts is that in Windows? Well, it's actually been added as a network share. It's this one here, Guacamole on Guacamole RDP. And in here, there's the file we just uploaded. So if I wanted it on the desktop, I can just drag and drop it there. Now if I go into this download folder here, and I drop something into the download folder, well, that will transfer straight across over to my browser and download onto the computer that I'm on now. So, you know, it's pretty cool. So that's how you do file transfers using RDP. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is how to start up a machine that's shut down, whether it's physical or virtual, by using a wake on LAN ping. Okay, so the machine that we'll send this wake on LAN ping to is going to be this Windows 2012 one here. Now the reason I'm choosing this one is because it's an Unraid VM. So let's shut this down and edit the template, and let's scroll down to the bottom here, and where we can see this virtual network adapter, I'm going to copy the MAC address onto the clipboard. Now obviously if this was a real machine, we'd take the MAC address of its actual network adapter. Okay, so let's go back to the Guacamole web UI and click on the Windows 2012 configuration here, and let's scroll right down to the bottom, and here it says wake on LAN. Let's check this to send the packet, and now here we need to put in the MAC address which we just copied a moment ago. So let's put it in here, and now for the broadcast address we're going to put 255.255.255.255, and here we can put a wait time for Guacamole to wait until it tries to connect to the remote. I'm just going to leave this blank because if it times out I'll just connect again. So okay, I'm going to click on to save. Now let's go back to the Unraid server because we're not finished here yet. Now what we need to do is to go to the apps tab, and let's just type in here virtual machine wake on LAN, and we need to install this plugin. Okay, and then click on to done, and now let's go to the settings tab here, go to VM manager, and now if we scroll down we can see here we've got this extra part here, the wake on LAN. So we want to enable that by setting it to yes, and apply, and done. And so now let's go back to the VMs tab and keep this open here, and now let's go back up to the Guacamole server and click onto my username and go to home, and now I'm going to make a connection to the Windows 2012 machine here. Okay, so it's connecting, waiting for a response. So now let's go back to the Unraid VM tab and just refresh this page, and hey, look, it started. Awesome. Okay, so now back to Guacamole, and we can see there was a connection error because it timed out. It's trying to reconnect again, and here we are, it's logged in. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is how to record the screen while the remote session's going on. Okay, so here we are back on the Guacamole server in the connections list, and this time I'm going to edit this PC here, this one called Claire, and if we scroll down to where it says screen recording, and this recording path here, again, it's mapped inside the container. So if we look at the template, it's mapped to this location here, /share. So let's pop that part in now. And so this share is mapped to the Guacamole share I've got here, and inside of here we've got this folder here called screen recording. That's where we want all the screen recordings to go. So back editing the connection, we now want to put / and then screen recording. Now for the recording name, that's the name that the video file will be called, so I'm going to call it Claire PC. And that's all we need to do here. So now scroll down to the bottom and click save. Okay, so now whenever there's a remote connection made to the PC Claire, it will record the screen, and we'll find the recording in the share that we created. Okay, so I just remoted into that PC to make a screen recording. So now let's go across to the share where it is to play it back, because playback isn't as straightforward as you might first think. Okay, so let's open a file browser into the Guacamole share, and here's the folder called screen recording, and here's the recording called Claire PC. Now a lot of people think you can just open this file with something like VLC, but sadly that doesn't work because this is a special type of file that's created by Guacamole. But there is an easy way that we can actually open it. Now let's minimize this, and I'm going to open another browser tab. So paste the link in the description into a browser, and we're going to download the Glyptodon Enterprise Player. And at the moment it's version 1.10, and we need to download this file here. Then once that file's downloaded, I'm going to paste it into the screen recording folder here, and then extract these files. Okay, so I'm going to remove the compressed file and just rename this to player. And now let's go into this folder here, and just the index.html file, let's open that with a browser. Just double click it, and now here we're just going to click onto browse and just browse to the location of the file, and here's the file here, Claire PC, and I'm going to click onto open, and then down on the bottom here click the play button, and here we are, we can see it logging in. And now we can see the screen playback. Okay, so that's how you easily can play back a screen recording in an Apache Guacamole server. Okay, before we go and put the Guacamole server behind a reverse proxy and enable two-factor authentication, let's have a look at using users and groups. Now obviously I've got all of these connections here, but I want to restrict them to be able to be accessed by various groups and users only. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group. So for that we obviously go to groups and then click new group. This one I'm just going to call standard, and here we can see the various permissions that I can give to this group. As it's a standard group, I don't want them to have any type of creation or administration permissions at all. And also I don't want members in this group to have automatic connection to any of these computers at all. So I'm going to click on to save, and next new group, let's call this advanced. And this group I want to be able to create new users only. So anyone that's in the advanced group will be able to create new users. And again, scrolling down, I don't want this group to be able to connect to any particular computer here. So I'm going to click on to save. And next new group, let's call this group directors. Now for the directors group, I don't want them to be able to create new users or any of this here at all, but I do want the directors group to be able to connect to any computer except for the Unraid server through SSH, just the workstations in the office. So let's click save, and finally for the last group, let's make this admin, and the admin group obviously is going to have permissions for absolutely everything and to be able to connect to all of the computers here. Okay, so we've got 4 groups now. So now let's go back to users here. Okay, so at the moment obviously I've only got my own user here. So I'm going to click on to add new user, and for the first user let's just call it accounts and give it a password, and next let's fill in the profile details. Okay, so here under account restrictions we could disable this user from being able to log in if we think maybe we want to enable them at a later date, but I want this user to be able to log in straight away. All of these fields are pretty straightforward. You can allow access after a certain time. You can deny access after a certain time. If I wanted the account to say be enabled in 1 week's time, I could put the date that I want the account to be enabled on here. And if I only wanted the account to be used for a short amount of time, I could put the date that the account's going to expire. And the user time zone, we can fill in the time zone for the user here. For me that's going to be GMT. And here under permissions, obviously this is the permissions of what the user can do. Now the only thing I'm going to tick here is to be able to change the user's own password. And next I'm going to add the user into the advanced group. So if you remember, my advanced group allowed the user to be able to create new users. So I wanted to do this through the group rather than through the individual permissions here. And scrolling down to connections, now one reason that I didn't want to give the advanced group connections to various computers is because I want to do that individually with the users. So for the accounts user, I just want him to only be able to connect to the accounts computer. So let's click on to save. Okay, so basically that's how we set up users and groups. You know, it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through and set up a whole bunch of things now. But what I am going to do now is I'm going to enable two-factor authentication before I go and put this behind a reverse proxy. So to do that we need to hop onto the Unraid server and go to the Docker template here and go to edit, and let's scroll down, and we're looking for this variable here, the TOTP variable, and we want to set that to yes by putting a capital Y. Okay, so now let's click apply to save the changes, and done. And now let's log back in. So I'm going to put in my username and password, and now it's saying multi-factor authentication has been enabled on the account. And so I want to get my two-factor authentication app, and I'm going to scan the QR code. And now I've scanned the QR code, my app's generated a number, so I'm going to put that in here and click on to continue. Okay, so now two-factor is enabled on this account. And now when any of the other users log in for the first time, they're going to be asked to set up two-factor as well. Right, so now it's time for us to reverse proxy the Apache Guacamole server. And we're going to use swag to do this. Now, if you remember, earlier I set a fixed IP address for this container. the 192.168.1.167. So if you're using a fixed IP, note down the IP address of what the container is running on. And then we're going to have to head over to the app data folder of Swag, which is my reverse proxy of choice. Okay, so we need to browse to the app data folder and go into the Swag directory here, then nginx, and then proxyconfs. Then if we scroll down in alphabetical order, we'll find the Guacamole server, and we're going to edit the subdomain one. And the first thing to look at here is this part where it says Guacamole. This is the subdomain name which we're pointing through. So you would need to have the subdomain set up for guacamole.yourdomain.com. I'm not using this as my subdomain, I'm just going to use remote. That's the subdomain I'm using to point through. Now, because I'm using a custom IP address, I'm going to have to change this line here where it says set upstream app. At the moment it's set for the name Guacamole, but you can see here that the container is called Apache Guacamole here. So if I wasn't using a dedicated IP address, I would put in the name of the container here in order for Swag to be able to find the container that it's pointing to. But because I'm using a custom IP address, I'm going to change it where it says Guacamole here to the IP address that I set the container to use. So for me, that is 192.168.1.167. So all this little part here does is it sets the app name or IP address, the port, and the protocol. Okay, so that's done, so now we need to save the file. So when saving the name, we need to take the .sample off the end, so the name reads guacamole.subdomain.conf, and click save. Okay, and so now I'm going to open the template of Swag, and you can see here I'm using a wildcard for my subdomain, so I don't need to put anything else extra in here. But if you weren't using wildcard, then you'd have to add the subdomain into the list that you'd have here. Okay, so now we need to restart Swag to reload the configuration file. And so now I can access it using the subdomain and get straight through to the login page. So now if I log in, it's asking for my authentication code too. And so here we are logged in on the web UI. Okay, so there we are, we're reverse proxied. We got two-factor authentication, so we're totally secure. And with that, it brings us to the end of this video. Wow, that was a long one this time, guys, this video. I think that's the longest one I've ever made. Well, I hope you found it useful and you enjoyed it. If you did, then please hit that like button, show me you liked it. And if you're not already a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Click the subscribe button and join the channel. Now, as always, I want to give a huge thanks to the guys that make all these videos possible, to my awesome Patreons and supporters. Thank you so much for enabling me to make these videos. And if you feel you'd like to join these great bunch of people and help support the channel, then you'll find links in the description of how to do that. Anyway guys, it's getting late here now and it's time for me to go. But whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good and I'll catch you in the next video.